We're going to start with our Women in Spirit opening prayer. And Denise, if you would be so kind as to share with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Joy. Good morning. Take a deep breath and exhale. Loving presence, all that is. Thank you for this time together on this most beautiful day. Thank you for the gift of life. Help us to share our journeys together that we may learn from one another and receive the strength and compassion that we need. Help each of us hear what we need to hear and be a blessing to those around us so that we can go out from this place renewed. For this, we are truly grateful. Amen. And so it is.
Thank you, Denise. I also became aware this morning with having a bit of news that there is a very sad and deadly tornado that happened last night in Kentucky. So I was hoping we might just take a moment of silence and love and bless all of those affected by that. And thank you, Spirit, for being with each and every one of those dear souls. Thank you. We have a little bit of business before we get on the road with our dear Phil Pearson. There is no fee for today's event, but if you'd like to make a donation, it simply goes to unityofdavis.org. I believe there's a link in the chat section, or unityofdavis.org is our website for Unity Center of Davis. Now, our Women in Spirit, we generally meet the second Saturday of the month, and next month, our program is one where we are going to give our food some thought with special guest Esther Loveridge. And hi, Esther, would you wave for us, please? Thank you. We're really glad you're here today. She's going to be talking about how a plant-based diet has truly changed her body, her mind, her spirit. And you're invited, if you come, you're invited to bring a nourishing, easy recipe to possibly share with all of us. And men, you are invited too. This is not just a women-only event. So that's Saturday, January 8th, 9:45 to 11:45 on Zoom. And now I'm very excited to spend a little time introducing our very special guest this morning, the Reverend Phil Pierson. Phil has been a Unity minister for over 61 years. He co-ministered with his beautiful wife, Dorothy, who made her transition in 2013. And they were at Unity Ministries in Honolulu and Sacramento, and I think lots of other places too. And I know several of our Unity Center of Davis congregants started at their well, first learned about unity from their congregation here in Sacramento. Some folks learned about unity from their television program, The Best Is Yet to Be. And Phil has also authored 5 wonderful metaphysical books that you can find on Amazon. And he's a beautiful, clear writer. So highly recommend. And I'm curious, by show of hands, how many of you have connected in some way with Phil over the years? And that looks like that's about half of us. So thank you, Phil. Thank you, thank you. I want to share my own brief story in that a friend brought me to Christ Unity Church in Sacramento in 1993. And while we sat in the very back of the church, because it was a full church, it was a Sunday that meant tremendous amounts to me, because it was the first time my soul actually said, "You're home." And so that's my brief story. I'd also like to share John's and my brief story, in that we met at that beautiful church. We were married in that beautiful church, and we honeymooned with Phil and Dorothy and 40 other wonderful folks in Europe, and spectacularly special. I have no doubt we could share lots of beautiful stories this morning, because Phil, you've just been part of lots of beautiful stories. But we wouldn't have time to hear Phil if we did that. So this morning, I've asked Phil if he would share some of his early history with us. And I'm hoping, as we get closer to 11, maybe about 10:45 or 10:50 or so, that we can open it up for questions or comments. And now we're going to get started with certainly one of the brightest, kindest, most loving unity ministers, unity people of any kind that I've ever met. And his name is Phil Pierson.
Thank you. Thank you, dear one. Well, as Joy said, she asked me if I'd like to tell stories that have happened during my ministry. And I want to say that I was delighted to respond to that particular suggestion, because to me, my life stories are an affirmation of what my ministry is committed to. That is, if you were to say, what's one thing you'd like to leave with the world that your ministry has shared, it would be this: every one of us has a very personal relationship with a creative mind that we call God. And when I say a personal relationship, I mean personal. Moment by moment in our lives, each one of us is shepherded by this presence. And those are words that we hear often, but to take them literally and live in our hearts and minds as if this was true is another thing. But when we do, my experience has been, and my story seemed to confirm, that there is a presence that has gone before me in my life. And my life has been a series of what could be called miracles, but that's a sometimes confusing word. It just means things that happen beyond expectation that are good, wonderfully good. And of course, one of those things that happened to me was meeting and eventually marrying Dorothy. And so that was one of the stories that Joy suggested I talk about. How did you get Dorothy in your life? But I suddenly remember she said that, or how you got into the ministry. And so I found myself thinking, now what shall I share with the folks? And then I went to a service here in Reno, a church that I'm a part of here, and the minister was talking, and out of the blue, about 3 weeks ago, she said, I want to talk about prosperity today. It was sparked by one of the most wonderful demonstrations of prosperity I've ever heard, given by Phil Pierson. I went, what? What would that be? She said, how he found unity. I mean, no, how he found Dorothy. How he found Dorothy. I thought, whoa, that settles it. That's what I'm going to talk about. And that's what I'm talking about. There is this presence that is always working to give you your answers, to open doors for you, whatever it is that your soul needs and desires. And again, that's so, in quotes, old time religion, a personal God. I can only tell you from my experience, it can't get any realer than it's been in my life. So anyway, I'm sparked to talk to you about how did I was going to say, get Dorothy. How did I end up marrying Dorothy in my life? Which was undoubtedly one of the greatest miracles that I ever experienced. I met Dorothy when I first went to Unity Village. Matter of fact, she was about the second one that I met when I went there, the first night I arrived in Unity Village. And the person that was hosting me there said, we don't have a place to eat at the village at night. Let me call I'm supposed to go to dinner. Let me call my hostess and see if you can join us. So I stood there while I hear her on the phone, and it was sort of turned out to be a lengthy conversation. He came back and he said, well, she doesn't seem to feel that it worked out for you to be there for dinner. But if I take you down to Lee Summit, you can get a dinner at a restaurant there, and I'll pick you up later because she said you can come for dessert. And I can tell that he was a little disappointed. I was not totally disappointed, but I thought it was a little strange that I wasn't included in the unity spirit that I had heard about. So anyway, I went and had dinner, and then I walked around the huge town of Lee Summit for at least an hour or more before I was picked up, and I was thinking not the most loving thoughts about this hostess that I was about to meet. So my friend picked me up and took me to the home where he had had dinner. And who opened the front door but none other than Dorothy. I thought, so this is the hostess that didn't have room for me. So I met Dorothy almost in the beginning, but not in the most likely spirit. And so she wasn't high on my list, not in any great negative way, but it's just, I was a little surprised it was my friend. So that was my introduction to Dorothy. Dorothy and her husband, Don, were in charge of doing classes at Unity School for people who wanted to learn more about Unity. They were a very popular couple, and people were sort of upset when they made the decision to go back to their church in Seattle, Washington, that they had built into a wonderful church before they were invited to come back to Unity School. So when they decided to go back to Seattle, as I say, people were disappointed. I didn't think a thing about it, other than that we had all enjoyed having them there at the school. But when I finished my ministerial training after about 2 years or so, I got a letter one day from Don O'Connor, Dorothy's husband, inviting me to come back and be their associate minister. And I was grateful for the recognition that they would want me there, because they had a wonderful church in Seattle that we had all heard about. But I immediately sat down and wrote him and said, thank you very much, but and I'm honored, but I have to say no. Now I said no because, and Rich can probably relate to this with me, I don't want to be anybody's associate. I know how to be a unity minister. I'm ready to go. Give me a church. And so anyway, I immediately told Don, thanks, no thanks. And then, and now we have the activity of spirit that works in your life in such a wonderful way if you're open to it. And I probably will say that several times, if you're open to it. How do you get open to it? By loving God with all your heart and soul and mind. That's the connection, that love connection. If you have that love connection with God so that it's a constant thing in your life, then you have it working for you. And so I had it working for me shortly after I said no to Don. I went out, I was invited to go with the gentleman that was the head of ministerial training at that time, Ralph Ray. And he was going to do a funeral service, and he took me along to have some experience of how he did funerals. So we were talking, and I said, well, how does it look out in the field right now? He was also in charge of placement of us new students. I said, how does it look? Are there a lot of places open? He said, well, you know, it's a strange thing, because right now there just aren't any openings. And I found myself, as we went on then the rest of the day, I kept thinking, wow, I've been here over 2 years now. I'm ready to go. I don't know that I want to just sit here and hope something opens down the road a year from now. And so I was moved to write Don back again. In those days, we didn't pick up our cell phone and call him. I wrote him a letter. I said, if you haven't changed your minds, I think I would be very pleased to accept your invitation. So that's how, through this unfoldment of events, I was led to go back to Seattle and work with Dorothy and Don. It was exciting because we were building a brand new church that became a national award church, architectural award, beautiful church, and had 1,000 people. It was exciting, but also exciting along with it that as Dorothy and Don and I played golf together and had time together as a threesome, also Dorothy and I were working with the architects a great deal, just the two of us. And so we had time to do a lot of visiting and talking, and gradually going into the process that some of you, I hope all of you perhaps have had, of falling in love. We were hopelessly in love. And as time went by, over a 2-year period, which I was working there in the church, and I was also starting churches in 3 other churches that I started in neighboring areas on Sundays. But beneath all these outer activities was this challenge that was created in my life and in Dorothy's life of being in love with each other, but not happy about it from the standpoint that we both loved Don, we loved our church. And so we had some deep heart-to-heart feelings about what are we going to do about this? And we both decided we couldn't hurt Don by saying we want to live together. We want to spend our lives together. And we also didn't want to do it to this beautiful church that we had there in Seattle. So we decided that I would accept an invitation that I had had once before, and that is to take the church in Honolulu, Hawaii. I had turned it down the first time when I was asked to go there. And that had to do with the fact I was involved in starting some other churches. And frankly, I was having too wonderful a time and in love with Dorothy. And so I just wanted to hang around some more. But anyway, I had been asked a second time to go to Honolulu. And this time I said to Dorothy, I think I need to go. And she said, you do. And so in real Hollywood type stuff, we were sacrificing our love, not to hurt Don, not to hurt the church, but we live and move and have our being in God. And so when you're open to that, the Spirit says, I hear you, but I know what's best for you. And so I'm going to open doors if you want to walk through for you. And so what happened was they were having parties for me to go to Hawaii. And hey, by the way, Joy, if I get wound up and lose track of time, just stop me, okay? Okay. So anyway, they were having parties for me and going away to Honolulu. And I was spending one of the last days in my office there at the church when suddenly Don came into my office and shut the door, sat down, and started to cry. I thought, for heaven's sake, Don, what's the problem? And his first words to me were, you've got to take care of Dorothy. I have fallen in love. Well, you could have hit me over the head with a mallet. And again, the Spirit works in incredible ways, just incredible. And so in any event, to shorten it now, Dorothy and Don, of course, had married as high school kids. I mean, they fell in love, or they decided to get married directly in high school. So they were too young, like many of us in our first marriages. And so it's not surprising that both of them could fall in love with someone at a mature level. And Don felt that he had fallen in love like this. However, when we then talked to Don, Dorothy and I both talked to Don and said, you know, this isn't the best for this church. You know, it's just not good. So in any event, Dorothy and I decided that I was going on. I said Dorothy and I because Don was sure he was going ahead and pronounce his love for this other person and get a divorce. And Dorothy and I decided in our private conversation that I was going ahead to Hawaii, and she would talk to Don, and she said he usually does what I want him to do finally. I'm sure you women all feel that way. In any event, I left with Hawaii with the conviction that she was going to change Don's mind. Well, Don wasn't going to have his mind changed. And so they went on, and the divorce became final, and Dorothy was free eventually then to join me and begin our lives in Hawaii. From then on, what has always been a series of miracles for me became a rapid series of miracles once I had the consciousness of Dorothy with me as well. We had such wonderful things happen. Shortly after she joined me in Hawaii, and we were married in a matter of months or so after she was free and came there, a lady came into my office one day and said, I have something to ask you if you can help me. And I said, well, what can that be? And she said, well, you know, my husband and I have just built a brand new home overlooking the ocean. And my husband, who was the head of a large sugar plantation in the Philippines for something like 40 years or something, he just retired, and the CNH board has called him back in and said the natives down in the Philippines are having problems. And so we really need you to go back and get things in order before we bring a new leader in there. Would you live in our home while we're there? Well, how long will you be there? Well, we'll be there at least a year. So anyway, we moved into this beautiful new home as we have just begun our lives together, and overlooked the ocean. And it came with a maid and a gardener, and we didn't live there for a year. We lived there for 3 years. until they called us to go to Sacramento. Well, there was something else I wanted to tell you about. Anyway, how am I doing, Joy? Can I switch?
You're doing great. You just switch stories as you want to switch stories.
Okay, I'm going to switch the story then.
Okay.
I'm going to tell how I got into the uni ministry. It's a little longer. I'll try not to drag it out. But I tell it again because these things that happen are so beyond expectation. There's no way I engendered them by practicing what some metaphysicians think it's all about. That is learning how to take charge of your life by thinking what you want to get for results. Well, it's good to be agreeable to the good that you're seeking, but you short circuit yourself if you try to make all the decisions about what you ought to have, what's best for you, or what will protect you, what will prosper you. But if you believe that there is this spirit, this mind that is working for you, it will make it all so easy. And that's the theme of our sharing today. I want you to know, I believe with all my heart, soul, God means life to be easy. And yet everywhere I go in the world, I see people walking through life with this big frown on their heads, saying they're thinking about something they're trying to work out in their life, whether it's just their shopping list or how to make peace with their family or some other problem in their life. They're trying to do it all on their own. And it isn't meant to be that way. Excuse me. We were created by God to be an agent for God. God expects us to be open to God. You know, before I tell any more stories, let me say something else. I have a new book coming out in about a month, I think now. And in it, I have tried to point out how the 5 great religions of the world have unfolded, and each have brought their own special gift to humanity. And most recently, the Islam faith, that's the newest. The Islam faith has brought a message to the world that is an affirmation of what I'm trying to share with you today deeply. Actually, I think it was Jesus' message to a great deal, but it got lost by the early followers of Jesus, who determined that the crucifixion and his suffering for man's sin was the key note of Christianity. But I think the keynote was really when he was in the Garden of Gethsemane and he said, "Not my will, but thy will be done. Not my will, but thy will be done." The Islam faith, as you know, which is the newest religion to come, means to surrender. That's why they do so much prayer work, you know, bowing down, all because the essence, if they're living their teaching, their faith well, they give their life over to God. With all their being, they are meant to expect that God has a purpose and will use them, protect them, guide them, etc., etc. And Jesus has certainly affirmed that for us when he said, "Not my will, but thy will be done." Not in spirit of the crucifixion, but in the spirit of God loves me. God loves me. All I have to do is love God back and give myself over to God. So anyway, I hope those of you who are guided to get that book in the future, you will enjoy the comparison of the world religions. So now back to me and how I got into unity. I was in the oil business, never had any thought of being in anything but business. And going along, but I can't say I was enjoying myself because I really had no drive to be a big shot in the oil business and make a lot of money, nor did the business in general interest me. But fortunately, I was able to do it well enough that they seemed very pleased and everybody felt I was headed for a great future in the oil business. When my young wife, because I was married right after I got out of, no, I got married my last year in college. And both my wife and I were like Don and Dorothy when they got married. We were basically kids. And I'll put this in quotes, didn't know what we were doing, but having a lot of fun as a couple of boy girls. And so anyway, I can only say I messed things up enough that my wife, living with me in Paducah, Kentucky, and she was from Rhode Island and lived a country club kind of life with her family. She decided to go back home to her family, her parents. It was a great blow to me because I had been everybody's good, in quotes, good boy. And suddenly I was a heel in the sight of my wife and her family. So it sort of brought me to my knees in consciousness. And for the first time in my life, I began to read the Bible seriously. I had study courses in the Bible. I was a very good Episcopalian, very active in the Episcopalian church. But I started to read the Bible while I was traveling in the oil business. I was reading it at night in my hotel. And suddenly it dawned on me once, Jesus seems to be saying that the things that he has done, we can do also. And to all of you that probably go, that's a whole hat unity. It is, but it wasn't to me as an Episcopalian at all to even suggest that I had the attributes of Jesus. But I couldn't shake that. And so I thought, I've got to share this with people. And suddenly I found myself thinking, I want to go in the ministry and tell them that Jesus is really saying we have this incredible capability to live life with authority and with dominion. And so I went to see the bishop of the area of the Episcopal church I was in to talk to him about becoming an Episcopal minister. And my Episcopalian minister and I were dear friends. He was a former Marine. And so he was excited I was going to be an Episcopalian minister. However, by just talking to the bishop, one time I suddenly realized, I don't think I belong here. I don't feel the spirit that I'm excited by here. And so I put the brakes on that and told my Episcopal friend that I wasn't going to be an Episcopal minister, my own minister, which was a great disappointment to him. And to me, only because I was suddenly floundering with all this newly discovered concept of what we were capable of and what Jesus was trying to teach us. And where do I go with that now? So I made a major decision. I resigned from my job with the oil business, which was very difficult for me. Only because my best friend was the son of the chairman of the board of the oil company, which is the largest independent in the country. And when I had dinner with my friend's father, Mr. Blazer, and his wife, we sat by the fire, and I remember he said to me, I've lost Stu, and I've been counting on you to sort of take over someday. And so here I am thinking I'm excited by where Jesus is taking me. And this gentleman's telling me I have this great future in the oil business. And I think it was one of my great accomplishments that I was able to say to him, I can't turn back. I can't turn back. I just am so full of this that I have to. So anyway, I resigned from the oil business and went out to be with my family on the East Coast and started going around visiting different churches, talking to different ministers. And I couldn't find anyone that I made any contact with, which may have something to do with God's guiding spirit that turned me on and said, that's what I want to be. I want to be a Unitarian. I talked to one of the most successful Unitarian ministers in the country in Washington, D.C., thinking maybe I want to be a Unitarian. But I couldn't find anything. And so I was in Washington, D.C., and staying with friends, and they were all going out for a evening on the town and said, hey, you want to come along? I said, no, I'll just stay here alone. And so I stayed in my friend's apartment, and I remember being so unhappy because my friend, who had connections with the Eisenhowers in Washington, he had arranged appointments for me with the head of the Red Cross and the head of one of the political parties. And of course, I was thinking I had a great gift to give, and nobody seemed interested in me at all. So anyway, I'm in the apartment, it's late at night, and I'm alone and thinking, there must be somebody who needs me. And I remember, as a good Episcopalian, I got down on my knees by the bed and I said, dear God, somebody must need me. My unique abilities. I've given up on the ministry now because nothing opened up. So I'm just going to go back, and I guess God wants me to be rich. So anyway, I closed my prayer with those words. Dear God, somebody must need me. I got back in my bed, and I was only in bed maybe 15 minutes, and the phone rang. And I thought, should I answer that for my friend? So anyway, I decided to answer. I got up, I answered the phone, and this voice said, is Phil Pierson there? I said, this is he. And he said, Phil, this is Bill Darling. Well, I haven't told you this, but I worked in between all this while I was searching for a place to be a minister. I had worked for Standard & Poor's Corporation of New York as a regional manager. And Bill Darling was the vice president of Standard & Poor's Corporation. And so he said, hi, Phil, this is Bill. Now, this was his first words to me. I need you. Now, mind you, maybe 20 minutes ago, I had gotten off my knees and said, dear God, somebody must need me. And Bill Darling, this very honcho businessman, vice president of Standard & Poor's Corporation, his first words to me were, Phil, I need you. And that's the absolute truth. You talk about somebody saying, I want you to know I'm working for you. So anyway, I said, well, how soon do you need me? He said, how soon can you get to New York? So anyway, I go to New York, and I spent my days in New York beefing up on the market and all. And while I was working in an office there, a man stuck his head in the door and said, hi. And I realized who that was. I said, oh, he's the regional manager of New York City. He makes hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. But everybody doesn't really like him because he always tells you how to run your business. So when he stuck his head in the door and said hi, and my mind said immediately, I could just say hi and put my head down in my book again, and he'd go on. And I said, that's not the Christ-like thing to do. So I said, hi, come in. So he comes into the office. Right away, he begins telling me, he said, you got a big territory out there. He said, you just need a place to hang your hat. He said, you could stay in I suddenly can't find the word for it. Anyway, he said, you could stay in what the heck? Some of you may be able to relate. Every once in a while you pull a blank. I can't think of what the heck it is.
You're right
Anyway,
there with all of us, Phil. We're right there with you. Yeah, absolutely. It's cool.
Good. Anyway, he said, you can stay in and I thought, I wouldn't stay in one of those places. That's too much. I'd been in the Army and the Navy, by the way, in 2 wars. And I thought, no, I think of that kind of place as having barracks and all. I don't want to stay there. And but I didn't say that to him. I said, oh, well, finally he left. So anyway, then I go out in the territory and I stopped at some country clubs and said, do you have private rooms? And I saw myself in that kind of a setting, this bachelor, and I'm sure God was going to open doors for a wonderful, exciting experience, along with making all this money that I guess God wanted me to make. And I'm driving to this territory, and I came to the town that I was born in. And I hadn't been there since I left there as this infant years ago. And I thought, I was parked there and I thought, this is the town I was born in. And I'm stopped at a red light. And as I'm sitting there in the red light, I glanced over, and here was one of those buildings that I can't think of the name of at the moment. And I thought, oh, well, maybe I'll go in there and see if they got a place to stay. And so I looked over, and there was a parking place right there. So I went to the light, parked, walked in, and I said, do you have private rooms here? They said, oh, sure. Private bath? Oh, yeah, sure. Well, I said, well, can I see one? And I looked, oh, it was quite a nice room. I thought, well, the guy's right. I'll be traveling, staying in places all over. Doesn't matter where I have a place to call my headquarters. And so I went down and I said, I'll take it. And as I did that at the desk, I looked over, and there on a table in the lobby was a little sign that said, Unity class here on such and such a night. I thought, Unity. I think that's that stuff. My mother takes a little book that says Unity. I thought, oh, that's interesting. So anyway, I went on, and then I came back and there the next week, and I came back at a time when that class was there. So I went down to this class that evening. It was held there in the hall, and a darling lady minister was there, and she greeted me, and I sat down. And yeah, she greeted me, and I'd say maybe 15, 20 people both came, and she gave this class. Well, I didn't know anything about Unity, but I was so impressed with her and her poise and her radiation of love and positiveness. And then she led us into meditation and took us from this little town of Beverly, which I haven't said, that's where I was born, Beverly. And she took us from the little town of Beverly out into the state, and then out into the country, and then into the world. And we were blessing everybody. And I thought, I've never had an experience like that. Mine were always, God forgive us our sins. I was a good Episcopalian, and etc. And this was a whole new experience for me. So I was moved. I was moved enough to decide that next week I was going to make sure I was back there for the night of the class. So I got there, because I'm staying there. I'm down there real early. I walk in, and there's nobody there, but this, I said the minister was a darling lady. There was a darling man standing there instead of a lady. Not a darling, but a cute guy. And he introduced himself and said, my wife won't be here to teach a class tonight, but I'm a licensed Unity teacher, and I'm taking her place tonight. And I said, oh, that's nice. And I went and sat down. I'm the only one there because nobody else has arrived yet. So I'm sitting, and the gentleman left me and went to the back of the room. And then suddenly I noticed he was standing by me. And when I looked up, and he said, were you here last week? And I said, yes. He said, well, my wife said, if that young man shows up again, she said, give him this. And he handed me this little pamphlet. And I thanked him without looking at it. He left. I looked down on the pamphlet and it said, "How to become a unity minister." Now you remember, I've been looking for 4 years. I'd left the oil business 4 years ago. I'd been looking for a place to be able to share what I felt was exciting about Jesus' message. And suddenly, here's a man giving me a pamphlet from somebody who was clearly very intuitive, and it said, "How to become a unity minister." So within a week or so, I had made plans to go out to this headquarters to see what this unity was all about. I didn't have the slightest idea. But I was moved by this miracle, something way beyond the normal, that woman should know that I was interested in the ministry without sharing a word with her about that. All I did was thank her for the class the night before and went out. So anyway, I flew out to Unity Village, and that's when I had the experience I've already told you about of not being invited to Dorothy's for dinner. But anyway, I was totally impressed with the physical facilities of Unity. Had a session with James Della Freeman, and I always blamed him for my becoming a Unity minister, because he's the one who said to me, "I think you can become a very outstanding Unity minister." And I thought, wow, that's awfully kind of him to say that. He hardly knows me. So anyway, years later, I always blamed him. I said, you're the only reason I was in the ministry, because I was hanging. I didn't know that much about Unity, but he moved me. And so anyway, by the time I left there and that session with Jim and my own prayer work, I knew this is where I belong. And so I went back, and my dear friend, Bill, the vice president of Standard & Poor's, he was a little shook because, gosh, I skipped the whole session. I was going to say a little shook because that's the second time I had left him. When I was first with Standard & Poor's as regional manager for him, I was not enjoying the work. And I remember one night, again, in my prayer work on my knees, I said, "Dear God, I don't want to upset anyone, but I'm not enjoying this. Can you get me out of this job on a positive note?" Are you ready for this one? I mean, a miracle is that which happens that is totally unexpected and beyond the norm when you're saying, "I want out of this on a positive note." I went home from that trip on the road to my parents' house, where I was in that session, staying. I had a special letter, and the letter was from Uncle Sam. And it said, "We had the pleasure of inviting you to join the United States service." It was during the Korean War. So anyway, that's why I said I had to tell Bill that I was leaving Standard & Poor's, because and of course they all felt sad for me, and I didn't tell them, but I was delighted. So anyway, I served my time during the Korean War. Oh gosh, one story was, I ran out of time here. Where are you? There we are, Joy. Am I okay?
We've got about 5 to 10 minutes.
Okay, well, I can tell you this much. So everybody felt sorry. The poor guy is being drafted in the Korean War, and I got an infantry rating. I thought, oh my gosh, I really don't see myself on the front lines of Korea killing people or being killed. And so anyway, when I had my orders cut, lo and behold, I was sent to Europe and went to a funny little post, a hospital unit in France. And I was there maybe a couple of weeks when I was assigned to be the orderly for the commander of the post. And so I'm basically sat outside his office all the time waiting for him to tell me what to do. But one day the sergeant major of the post who really runs things. Any of you in the service know that it's the sergeant major that runs things. It's not the officers. Anyway, the sergeant major called me in his office and he said, look out, here's the totally unexpected coming again. He said, you know, Pearson, he said, I've been watching you and I think you can do a job that I've been doing. My wife says she doesn't want me to do it anymore because it means being away from home so much. I said, oh? He said, yeah, I want you to know if you would be the business manager for our football and baseball teams. I had already had a few weeks of doing bivouac and sleeping on the ground and standing in formation all the time. And this was, nobody was in charge of me, just me. There was a lieutenant who was, but he let me do whatever I wanted to do. So anyway, I was in charge of taking baseball teams and football teams to Paris and other cities around France and doing what was allowed for in the military, because the troops had to have their social time, and I was in charge of it all. So anyway, I tell you that because is that what you expect when you get going to service? No, it's way beyond it. But those things happen all the time when you seriously believe that there is a presence that is in all and through all and is capable of anything working for you. And with all the sincerity of my heart, as I look at your faces here today, I know that every one of you have the same connection to universal mind. And it wants you to have an easy life. We weren't created to have to fight our way through life and figure out who we're going to marry or how we're going to get a job. It will work through your life to bring your highest good and make the best use of you. And so in wrapping up, I would say, why does God do this for you? Just because God loves you? No, I personally think God delights in taking our uniqueness and working through it to bring forth good in the world in some way. Every one of us is uniquely qualified to bring to the world something that almost nobody else can do. And God delights in taking that uniqueness and put it to work. And if you allow for it, by loving God in return, God will go before you. You don't have to figure out how you're going to find the right person to marry or figure out where you're going to find that job. It may take a little while, as it did for me, but it'll work out and you can have a wonderful, wonderful life. So thank you for the privilege of saying all that, because if there's any gift I want to give the world, is to help people to live life easier than most people live it. So thank you for having me. Thank you.
Oh, my goodness, Phil, thank you. I feel like I'm overflowing with good. Thank
Well,
you.
you had a nonstop talker, that's for sure.
So I'm wondering, anyone want to raise their hand and have a question or a comment that they'd like to ask or share?
I see a hand.
Lise, do you want to unmute?
Some years ago, we used to every week watch The Best Is Yet to Be, and we loved that little dog. We loved that poofy planet. And that's how we got introduced to the ideas of unity. So thank you for that. We thought it was wonderful. We were sad when it didn't continue. Thank you.
I'm glad you brought up the television show, because that's one more way beyond the norm thing is that, as some of you know this, but Dorothy was the head of a banquet committee back at the school when we were in the ministry. And one of the young students there was the name of Connie Haynes. And Connie Haynes, as some of you may know, was a big band singer, sang with Frank Sinatra and Tommy Dorsey. Anyway, she came to me at the end of that banquet and said, I'd like to, when I finish my ministry, I want to come and work with you and Dorothy. And so anyway, I asked Dorothy and we said, why not? Let's do that. So anyway, Connie Haynes joined us, and those of you remember Connie, she was invited 4 times by 4 different presidents to the White House. She wanted to be our associate minister. Anyway, I can't tell you all the little nitty-gritties of the story, but it was because we had Connie with us that we eventually were invited by Channel 40 in Sacramento to do a television program there. And to my knowledge, nobody in Unity has ever been on 40 was one of the largest independent stations in the country. We were on that and a number of other stations. And again, we didn't do it. Spirit did it. It's so easy. Okay. Anything more before we close up? Did you have something fun, Sean?
Well, just all of us to you, that was unbelievable. Anyway, so the message is so powerful. And one little question that I guess has technically, Joy, will we be able to replay this on Zoom at some point, or will there be a link?
It is getting recorded. And Reverend, can you give us any further information on that?
The Zoom, the recording will be posted to the Unity Center of Davis YouTube channel.
Fabulous. And yeah, there's so many. I feel, Reverend Phil, that you're like Johnny Appleseed. You're just sprinkling your message and your wisdom and all the power that's been channeled through you and I believe this message today is going to touch more lives than you realize as well. Just it multiplies and divides, and your presence, you are a legacy already. You are building, you are leaving so much to all of us, and thank you for, and I'm thinking the word might have been condominium.
I'm sorry, I couldn't quite hear what you said.
Well, I'm thinking, is that word condominium?
Am I in a condominium?
No, do you remember that you were looking for a word for where you would stay?
Oh no, I was thinking of a.
That's okay. That's okay. Close enough. We got the gist.
It's an organization that's all over the country, and they have these in various places.
The
Okay.
YMCA.
As soon as we go off the air, it'll come to me. That's the way it happens. As
That's
you know.
all right. You're in good company. Thank you so much. That was so unbelievable. Just so precious. Thank you.
Well, thank you. It's the joy of my life to share this wonderful reality of God's love for each of us.
I believe. I'm so
Brother
happy.
John.
Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you, Brother Phil. I very much related to the idea that God likes to make life easy for us. And all the situations that you described where doors open when you hadn't even put your hand up to knock yet. The one kind of a footnote or an additional thought, growing up, I never had any kind of a thoughtful connection with God or spirit. And what I decided in my consciousness now in later days is that it didn't matter that I didn't have that connection. What happened is that God had that connection with me, even though I had no awareness whatsoever of it. But all the little situations that you described, where out of the blue, somebody spoke up and guided you without any effort on your part. I relate so strongly to that. And I think, for me at least, I'm delighted to have come to an awareness later in life that Spirit was taking care of me, even though I had no awareness at that time.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate that, John. I think we accelerate the opportunity for God to work in our lives when we spend a lot of time loving God. That's the only thing. People are loved by God, whether they're loving God or not. Jesus told us to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, and mind, not because he felt God needed it. He knew that's the strongest connection you can have to getting God's activity in your life is to love God and to do it the way you mean it, the way when you really love your husband or wife, you don't just tell them every year, hey, it's Sunday, I think I'll tell you I love you. I mean, you do it all the time. That's what Jesus knew would keep us closest to God's caring for us. Yeah, thank you, John.
Bill, we've got a couple of hands up. Donna Twelbridge.
Yes, well, I would like to tell Reverend Pearson.
Oh, okay.
Same reaction Joy did when I worked with neighbors about unity. She started talking about it. It sounded like, oh my God, this is what I've been looking for, all this searching I've been doing. So I went to your church in Sacramento, the old bowling alley across from the Capitol. And I had that exact, I'm home. This is my home. This like home. And I want to thank you for that, because you and Dorothy, of course, are there. And you just this very I don't know, your energy is so spiritual and so loving, and it's just been wonderful. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Donna. Thank you.
And then the Schneiders have their hand up.
Phil, Paula Schneider here, and Reverend Larry Schneider here. He's a little bit shy today, but anyway, I just wanted to say that Larry and I both have settled into a part of unity that I'm afraid people are losing, and it's the metaphysical Bible study. And we're both just quite passionate about the metaphysical Bible dictionary and getting the word out about how important, if you're going to be in unity and you're going to study unity, how important it is to understand metaphysical interpretation, or you might call it symbolic interpretation. And in fact, there's a quote by Lowell Fillmore where he says that unity was actually founded on a metaphysical interpretation of the Bible. So I guess my question to you is, we do have a study group. It's a very healthy study group that comes together once a week to study metaphysical Bible interpretation. My question is, as you go around or you talk to people in the unity movement, do you see this particular activity thriving, or do you think that we might be losing something by not having enough people really out there that really understand it well enough to teach it?
Well, I have to begin by saying I really don't circulate around the Unity Ministries anymore. Very much so, I'm not in a position to say what they're doing with their metaphysical studies. I do know that the metaphysical interpretation of the Bible is one of Unity's greatest gifts to give to humanity, literally. And perhaps I can add to that in saying I've spent certainly the latter part of my 60 years in the ministry trying to weigh what unity is trying to do with the rest of the spiritual outreaches of the world, religious and spiritual. And I don't think there's anything that offers as much to the world as the unity movement does today. And I just pray for it and give thanks for dynamics somewhere in the leadership of unity to know that and to affirm that all around, and not all around isn't the right word, considering the study of the Bible, the study of what Jesus' life meant, the metaphysics of mind control, etc. Unity has the greatest overall interpretation of this, especially if you stay close to where the Fillmores were. And I don't want to get started on that, but I think we drifted a little from the simplistics of the Fillmore approach, which was pretty much close to what we're talking about today. They believe, I mean, they championed the prayer like, God is my help in every need. God does my every hunger feed. God walks beside me every day, et cetera, et cetera. It wasn't about taking command of your life by positive thinking. I'm all for positive thinking, but the greatest effort we need to make is in loving God with all our heart and soul and mind, and our neighbor as ourselves, Anyway, thank you for that question on metaphysics.
Reverend Phil.
Yes, Rich.
I don't know if you have seen this or not, but I'll just bring this up right now. I just so agree with what you and what Paula were saying. And I don't know if you know the ministerial student, Mark Hicks. You probably don't, but he has a website called Truth Unity.
I know him well.
Well, you know, he's got that Fillmore Study Bible on there. And I don't know, but it's almost complete now, and it's up on the website, and it's just wonderful. If anybody hasn't looked at it, it's got as the, you know, if you look at the NSRV, you'll see the notes down at the bottom with the footnotes, and he's got Charles Fillmore quoted right there in the notes about the verse of the Bible. So
absolutely,
it's worth looking at. That's truthunity.net. And Phil, I just, before we're done, I wanted to say thank you for being here and for coming through to Unity Center of Davis. Is just such a, well, I hear so many stories about you from these people.
Well, it's been my privilege, and I'm glad you spoke about Mark, because he's an outstanding soul. He is of the Spirit. That's for sure.
Amen. Yes.
Glad you mentioned him.
Thanks for being with us and telling the story. I'd like to just, if I have it, we have a few more minutes. So you're there, and Dorothy doesn't let you in for dessert, and but you, or she doesn't let you in for dinner, but you get in for dessert, and then now you're a Unity minister. What happened there, real quick? Was she pleasant when you came back for dessert? Did you? What happened?
Oh yeah, well, she was very pleasant, and I can't say it went much further in terms of my unhappiness, except I never let her forget that. I said, listen, you didn't even invite me for dinner the first time I came over. Oh, Christ. I'll tell you quickly, you know, we had such a blessed 50 years together. I can only think of one time we had an all-out fight, and I think we were fighting over something like a waterbed. I think I wanted the waterbed. She didn't want the waterbed. Next thing you know, we're going at it, and she says, I'm out of here. I'm leaving. And she got in the car and took off. I think she indicated she was going up to speak with her sister up in Seattle from Sacramento. Anyway, I thought, well, she won't. She's not going anywhere. But she didn't come back. She didn't come back. And I thought, and oh, we had been in our pajamas, and I was still in my pajamas. But I got dressed because I thought, I got to go find her. And so I got all dressed, and suddenly I heard the garage door going up, and she was coming back. I jumped in bed and pulled up the blankets up around me. And so when she came, I said, oh, you came back, did you? As if I could care less. And of course, then eventually she found out I was all dressed, and coming after. That was about the only fight we ever had. We had such a blessed time. But when I wanted to get to her, I'd remind her of that first night we met. Yeah. Thank you. Well, listen, Doc, you've been wonderful, audience. I love you and bless you all, and give thanks that each in your own lives are being blessed with the richness of God's love for you, but you're also attracting other people. That's what we've got to do. We've got to, by the tenor of our own lives, people say, where do you get this? Where do you get this? And they'll say, oh, well, I want you to come hear our minister. That's the way we build our churches, through our own life example. Well, God bless you all. Have a wonderful day.
And God bless you. Thank you, dearest.
Thank you,
dearest
Joy, for thinking of me.
Thank you. To close out our meeting, I've asked John to read the dedication from Phil's book about Buckminster Fuller. And if anyone hasn't already heard of Buckminster Fuller, this is the book. And one of Phil's great loves to talk about on a Sunday. So here's his dedication.
It is my joy to dedicate this book to Dorothy, my wife and partner for 50 years and my constant cheerleader. She is an inspiration to millions through her ministry, writings, and poetry. She came into this dimension filled with purpose and light and went out of it in the same spirit. This book is the fruition of our final days together. My horizon, the horizon where sky meets the sea, or the land, holds a message of stability. In powerful support, beckons me to stand and move out beyond my sight's bound. And as I move, so my horizon expands. I grow strong in my steps, in realizing there are no bounds. I am free to be the expanding expression of life that God wills for me. Dorothy Pearson.
Thank you. Thank
One
you.
of the
thank you.
one of the joys of my life is that Unity School decided to have a special prayer room in the Silent Unity building dedicated to Dorothy. If you're ever there, be sure to visit it.
We will. We will. Thank you. Thank you.
Bless
And
you all.
now, oh,
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Phil.
I was just going to say, have a wonderful day.
Have a wonderful day. Our Julie Curry has our Women in Spirit closing prayer.
I feel so infilled right now, as we all do. But for our closing prayer, Divine Creator, as we go forth from this place, help us remember who we truly are and be the beacons that can transform the world. We ask that you help us remember the gift of sharing that we have received and to courageously shine our lights. We thank each person here today for their loving energy, for each one has contributed to the benefit of the group. Bless us as we go from this holy gathering. Amen.
Thank you, dear Phil. Thank you,
you.
dear